Hey there. Thank you for joining me tonight as we discuss Chapter 3 in Real Estate Principles. We're going to be talking about ownership of real estate, which is an interesting topic. And we'll discuss a couple different ways that you can take ownership and also how you hold title is a term that's commonly used regarding the vesting and how you own that ownership of real estate. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to share my screen and we'll start discussing some of chapter 3. To share. So the first thing we're going to talk about is an interesting word that comes into play in this chapter called estates. Now you might hear this word estates and you might think of a big fancy mansion, with a lake out front with the swans swimming, the castle in the background. Well, the word estate in legal terms about real estate is primarily talking about an interest in. So we're going to start there. First off, an estate. An estate means interest in real estate. So instead of trying to define it further, I'm going to give you some examples. We see estates in we see estates in real estate in two different ways. Sorry. First off is a freehold estate. The second one is called a less than freehold estate. And so instead of trying to define these further, I want to give you some examples. And so let's start with the freehold estate. The freehold estate is there's a couple different terms associated with it. The first one is called fee simple ownership. Now, the fee simple ownership is what we think of as like the highest level of ownership. Basically means that you own the dirt, you own the structures, you can pretty much do whatever you want with them. You can buy that, you buy it, you can fix it up, you can sell it, you can paint it, whatever color you want. You can buy it, own it for 50 years, pass it on to your kids, right? This highest level of ownership. Basically, it's your property and you can do what you want with it. The next step down, if you will, if we can think of it that way, is called a fee simple defeasible, and I'll abbreviate here. The fee simple defeasible is you have this highest level of ownership, but here's our but you can only paint it one of three colors. You own this property, but you can't rent it out to somebody else. You have to live in it yourself. You own this property, but you have to maintain it properly and make sure that it's always painted. There's no rust coming through the paint from any metal work. Stucco's not chipping off, that sort of thing. So this idea of the fee simple defeasible kind of sets up this level of rules with real estate that you have to follow in the ownership of that property. A third type of freehold estate is called a life estate. Now, in real life, I've never seen this. Excuse me. Kombucha. Cheers. In real life, I've never seen the life estate actually happening. But the idea of the life estate is that you have an estate in real property. You can use it for as long as somebody else is alive or as long as you're alive. So the life estate is based off somebody's life. This would allow you to live in it, even to rent it out to somebody else. You couldn't sell it, you don't own it, but it gives you this interest in, this is an estate, in real property. The life estate based on somebody's life. Now to contrast that, let me give you some examples of a less than freehold estate. And first off, the example we're going to talk about is called a lease. You might be familiar with this if you've ever leased an apartment or leased a house to live in, or maybe you lease office space for a business or a commercial property. The lease is an example of a less than freehold estate. You still have an interest in the real property. You still have the right to use it when you're leasing property. Obviously, you can't sell it, but by living there, by using the space, by paying rent, you have certain rights. You have an estate, an interest in real property. I want to bring up, oh, and we usually see that in the term of this less than freehold estate. We see this in the term tenancy or tenant, right? So you think of yourself as a tenant when you're renting something. This is a less than freehold estate. I want to bring up a little trick that will help you in your real estate educational journey here. As we learn about real estate, we learn a lot about the law, and the law is oftentimes not in normal conversational English. And so everybody coming into this class is going to learn a new vocabulary, maybe not remember it all, but you're going to learn some legal language, and oftentimes not in normal conversational English, based off of, you know, Latin and all other types of languages, our law system. And so one of the ways that you can remember this, or it can help you remember these relationships, is or to the E. And so when I write this or to the E, we're going to see examples of this through the course, through your readings of these words, or to the E. Excuse me. This or to the E is the direction of the action. Okay, so when we're talking about or to the E, we're not talking about people. We're not talking about buyer and seller. We're not talking about owner and tenant. We're not talking about lender and borrower, or bank and borrower. We're talking about the direction of the action, or to the E. So for example, if I ask you less or less E, which one is the tenant? Less or less E. So if we use the root word lease and we say lessor, the lessor leases to the lessee, right? The direction of the action. So in that example, in a lease, lessor is the owner, lessee is the tenant. If we're talking about offer or to offer E, this means something different, right? We're talking about the offer to purchase. Now we're talking about the offer or, the buyer makes the offer to the offeree, the seller. The transferor to the transferee, right? Trustor to trustee. Beneficiary. Oh, that's a different word. That doesn't count. We see the or to the E happen in a ton of different ways in real estate. So always remember or to the E, it's a direction of the action, whatever you're talking about there. And so when we're looking at these two terms, freehold, less than freehold, in a comparison like this, here's where we can think about the actual relationship of the people. On the freehold estate, we're talking about the owner of the real estate, the owner of the dirt, the owner of the structure. On the less than freehold estate, on the less than side, we have still an ownership, but it's not in the property. The tenant, the lessee, the less than freehold estate, right, is the owner of personal property. Oh. Wow, I just completely botched that. Let me start over. The freehold, the owner of the real property, the dirt and the structure. The less than freehold is the owner of personal property. And in this relationship that we're looking at right now, it's a piece of paper. It's personal property. It's not land and dirt. It's the right to live there. And it's a contract. Both of these people, both of them have an estate. So I really want to bring home this idea of an estate. It's not the dirt, it's not the property, it's this interest in the real property. The owner who owns it has an interest in the real property. The tenant that's living there has an interest in real property. They have rights as well. And we see that in two different ways right there. I hope that clarifies a little bit, since again, this freehold, the less than freehold, that's not normal English. And so it can be a challenge to kind of get what that means. Hopefully that helps. When we buy real property, we take title in different ways. This term is also called a vesting. How you vest in the property, what's your vesting in the property. So I'm going to go over a couple different ways that we can take title to property. The first one is called sole and separate property. This type of ownership is usually when you're an individual. An individual person is owning the property. Typically, it's called sole and separate property. You're not married. You're not taking ownership with a partner. Sole and separate, just one person on there. The next type of property, or I'm sorry, ownership title, is called community property. You may have heard that California is a community property state. What that means is that once you become married, two people become one in the eyes of the law, with your stuff at least. And so community property state in California says once you get married, your two people, your stuff becomes one. And so this is where you hear stories about people getting married. 10 years, 20 years later, they get divorced and they have to split everything up. They have to sell the house, cash out, and basically split the money. Because the idea is when those two people become one, all their stuff becomes one as well. The benefit in real estate when we see this type of vesting called community property is that if we have this married couple, both married couple are on title as husband and wife, as partners. And so the idea with community property says if one dies, the other one is still already on title. So we don't have to go through probate. We don't have to go through lawyers. We don't have to go through any type of legal proceedings. That in community property, if you own it, Rick and June Boone, husband and wife, we're talking about two people who are owners on the property. If one dies, the other owner is still there on title. This avoids legal fees. It avoids taxes and a bunch of other stuff we'll talk about in just a minute. So typically community property is when you have, a married couple and they are owning that property together. Another type of property vesting, again, taking title, is called joint tenancy. Now, these couple different topics are a little bit interesting and unique because we don't see them all the time. And so this joint tenancy comes down to more of like a business relationship. And so we see maybe partners coming in and buying the property together. So in joint tenancy, I'll give you an example of one. Let's say we have 3 people that are owning this property. Sorry, it's very small. They only have eyes. Let's just say in joint tenancy, we have these 3 owners. Let's say maybe they're siblings. And one of those siblings or one of those partners dies. What ends up happening is that now we have ownership with 2 people. The third party, in essence, gives up their interest to the rest of the 2 after they die. It doesn't pass on to the spouse. It doesn't pass on to the kids. We had 3 owners, one dies. Now there's 2 owners. This is an example of joint tenancy. Another way to hold title as a kind of business relationship is called a tenancy in common. Now, the idea of a tenancy in common allows us to split up the levels of ownership. See, with joint tenancy, if there's 3 owners, you are 1/3 owner. If there's 2 owners, you are a half owner. A tenancy in common allows you to cut up that pie however you want to. Someone can be 50%, someone can be 25%, there's a 10 in there, and then we have this remaining portion where maybe there's 20 other owners in that remaining portion. So a tenancy in common actually can allow us to pull money from different people, from different sources, and create a group ownership of this property in a lot of different ways, a lot of different percentages that play out. Again, this is a way that a lot of partnerships or businesses might buy property together. A couple different ways, and oftentimes when we're thinking about individual people and not businesses like the joint tenancy and tenancy in common, oftentimes the point in how we take title, sole proprietorship, community property, there might even be like a trust, like a living trust or an LLC. These are some other ways that we can own property kind of as a separate entity. A lot of times people, individuals, or couples own property in this way is to avoid probate, to avoid being taxed on this property, or when you sell it, being taxed on the money that you make. Now we're going to talk about probate a little bit in the next chapter, but I wanted to bring it up here just so you can see it. We want to try to, usually for most people, they want to try to pay as little tax as possible. And they want to avoid probate, which is a court process that in essence dictates where your money goes and where your property goes. So usually behind this decision of how you take title or how you invest in your property, usually this is a legal question or a tax question. I actually had a student this week that emailed and said, hey, I don't understand this. Why in the world would somebody do this over this? Well, and the idea is, and will an agent, is it the agent's job to help a buyer figure this out? The answer is no. Maybe a lender might give you insight, because sometimes how you get the loan, like for an example, an LLC has to get a certain type of loan. Community property means there's two people on the loan. That's two people. I mean, two people on the property, two people buying the property. It requires two people on the loan. A joint tenancy is going to be a totally different loan process than if you're sole and separate property. So sometimes a lender involved in this can kind of direct you, but even after you own property, even after you close that loan, it's possible to change title of the property, to change your vesting from sole proprietor to community property, vice versa, open up a family trust or a living trust, so that transfer, that title can be changed or transferred even after the loan. Usually people are talking to tax advisors and or lawyers when they're going through this process. I'm gonna take a quick pause. After discussing different ways to vest in property, to take title in property as kind of an individual or a group of individuals, I want to just take a quick note about some different types of business ownership, because there's a little bit of difference here, but you might see that either as a real estate agent, you're the owner of a business, you're self-employed, congratulations, you're a business owner. And so there's several different ways that you can own your business, say as a real estate agent. Real estate offices, like a brokerage, would have a different type of ownership, most likely. And even as an owner of a property, you could own that property in different ways, as that property is a business. It's separate from your person. Say if it's an investment, it's a rental property, you're flipping it. Chances are you wouldn't own that in your own personal name. So just a couple options we can look at when we're talking about business ownership. And there's a little bit, again, overlap here, but you'll see some examples in how that might play out. The first one, owning a business, the easiest, fastest way to own a business is called the sole proprietorship. Maybe you've heard this term before, but the idea of a sole proprietorship, super easy to start. If you were to go outside, start picking up trash in your street, and somebody starts giving you money to pick up that trash, congratulations, you're a business owner. It's that easy to start your own business. Washing cars, cutting grass, fixing cars, right? All of this stuff, if you're getting paid to do it, it's a business. What's great about the sole proprietorship is that it's super easy to start up. And one of the other things we have to think about with businesses is how is it taxed? With a sole proprietorship, it's a one-page add-on to your tax returns every year called Schedule C. And the sole proprietorship is kind of the easiest way to pay tax. Basically, you are the business is you, and on your tax return, you're paying taxes on the business. Basically, it's adding to your normal income. There's another type of business ownership called an LLC. This is also the easiest way to separate Rick Boone from company. Why somebody would want to do this is that if something happens at the property and I'm sued, well, if the property is owned by an LLC, it's the LLC, a limited liability company. It's the LLC that's getting sued, not Rick Boone. And so this is why somebody might want an LLC, a separate business entity other than themselves, because at that point, the liability is kind of removed. I can't lose my home if I'm sued, if the LLC is sued. That's different from Rick Boone. Also in California, pretty easy to set up. And the cost, like the minimum tax cost is like $800 a year. So it is money out of pocket. But if the property gets sued or the owner of the property gets sued and it's an LLC, that can also maybe even save your home or your life savings or something like that. So LLC is another way that you can own property. Another way we can own property, take title, is called a trust. You may have heard of a trust fund baby, who doesn't work, right? Has no job, has no career, but they get checks every month. How in the world does that work? Well, think about a large corporation, or think about a large family name like Marriott or the Hilton, right? Now, chances are that's publicly traded. It's a corporation, but the idea is a family name that owns all this property. Now, all of the properties are owned under, I'm just giving an example of a big name, a recognizable name, right? But it's possible for that property to be owned by a trust. Every month, checks come in from those properties. The trust is making money, and then a check goes out to an individual person, the trust fund baby, who is just getting a check because they are a beneficiary of that trust. And so the trust is another way that property can be owned. And a trust is unique as well because it never dies. The trust lives on forever so long as the paperwork is held up. And that way too, the entity of the trust can own property in essence forever. And so that's one other way that that we could own property, but also as a business, kind of own that property, again, separate from the individual. Another way we can own a partnership and then potentially own real estate is called a general partnership. The general partnership allows somebody maybe to put money into the purchase of the real property, but then also stays, where the partnership is active, we can have multiple owners of that general partnership, and multiple people can put in money and everybody can participate. A limited partnership a limited partner can maybe put money into the partnership to purchase property, but then has limited liability. Hey, I just put my money in. I'm not managing the property. I'm not participating in the business. And so the liability if the business gets sued, a limited partner isn't held personally responsible for that. You'll notice all these different examples. I'm giving you examples of legal ramifications, liability, and kind of protecting your assets and taxes, right? And that's the primary reasons why people make these decisions on how they own property. Lastly, because it's more convoluted, I kind of went in steps of like least formal to most formal. A corporation. Starting a corporation is usually pretty convoluted. You need to have several people, at least 3 in the formation of a corporation. Depending on how you're going to be taxed or how you want to be taxed, there's different things there. You can be a corporation and a nonprofit organization, but that's a tax filing thing. If you're owning this company and owning this property to service people, maybe it's held as a nonprofit. But again, that's not an individual, that's a group of people, usually controlled by some sort of board. So all of this hopefully will give you a little bit of insight, again, seeing kind of the steps of formality of these types of ownerships or types of business ownerships. I think something else that comes up in this chapter I wanted to just kind of note about is the term condominium, and a co-op. And just to kind of show you the difference, a condo is what we would normally think about when you have somebody that lives in a building, or they have one unit in a building, and there's multiple owners, right? There's multiple owners that live in these different units. Where we think about in New York, like somebody owns a flat, or you live in a flat, right? There's different owners all in the same building. This is typically called a condo. And what's unique about the condo, and there's other types of ownership as well that have this, but there's always a homeowners association. Because there's multiple people that own these units and own that part of that real estate, that dirt, we have to have some sort of organization called the homeowners association, which is made up of the owners to vote and make decisions on that property. If we have 100 owners in that building, that's 100 people that are affected when the plumbing goes bad, when the building needs a new roof, when the grass outside is dead, when there's a leak in the sprinklers. Everybody in the association, in that ownership of that building, is affected, right? So we have the homeowners association to make decisions for the owners. Again, the association is made up of owners of those properties. There's another type of term that's used, and this one is actually less common, but it's called a co-op. Now, a co-op, you have to think of this almost as owning shares of the property. So you might live in one of the units, but in a co-op structure, you don't own that individual unit. You own 1/4 of the property or 1/10 of the property. Again, I don't want to go too deep into this because it's much less common than a condo is, but just to give you an idea of what the difference is when you hear the word condo versus a co-op. The idea of this condo and homeowners association, I talked about a high-rise building with people owning multiple units or multiple people owning units. There's another kind of example that we might see a little bit more typically in Southern California is where there's a big plot of land, and I'll just draw 3 properties on this land, and there's 3 houses, and each one has their own little yard. Hopefully you can see my sad little drawing there. And what you will see in this ownership is that if I own this house in red and I own this dirt in red, but somebody else owns this house in blue and that yard in blue and so on and so forth, right? What do we do with all this other area? All my yellow highlights, right? Who does that belong to? Well, so in a condo, in a homeowners association, I own this interest in red, that house, that structure, that yard, but I also own part of this yellow. And in this example, I'm a 1/3 owner of the yellow. So that means if there's a basketball hoop and there's a park over here, there's a swimming pool, there's a central, party location, that you're a partial owner in all of that land as well and assets. So what happens when the pool leaks? Well, you're 1/3 owner of that pool. You got to put in 1/3 of the dollars to fix it. Or your homeowners association dues that you have to pay every month in the HOA would go towards that repair. This is one of the downsides of owning in a homeowners association, and especially in a city like Irvine, it's actually like the biggest master planned city. And so the idea of Irvine was that we have these neighborhoods set up in these large HOAs, even though it's not a condo ownership, it's a single family residence. You have these large ownership areas of properties. There are some areas in Irvine where you might have one area of homeowners association, and then you have a subsection within there as another set of homeowners association. And so I'll just put in another set of parentheses here. There's also dues associated with this, right? Fees that go in to repair the pool, to repair the basketball courts, the weight room, the grass, the playground, all that stuff comes out of that association dues. Hopefully that clarifies and can give you a little bit of difference, a different understanding of condo versus co-op. I also want to bring out one more term called a townhouse. Now, oftentimes people use townhouse and condo interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. So when we talk about a condo, we're talking about a type of ownership. We're talking about owning one house with 100 other houses on the same dirt, or one floor or one unit with 100 other units, right? This could be a condo ownership. A co-op is another type of ownership where you own shares in that building, right? Townhouse is not a type of ownership. Townhouse is a style. So when you say townhouse, or you read the word townhouse, if you could mentally check yourself and say the words townhouse style. Townhouse style refers to a little bit more of a kind of a construction term, really. When we're talking about real estate, it looks a little bit like this. Here's my house. Here's my window. And upstairs is the bedroom. I'm not going to try to draw a bedroom or a bathroom. You get the picture. We have 2 floors, and only I can access both floors. Nobody lives above me. Nobody lives below me. This is called a townhouse style. So let me ask you, could you own a condo? Yes, that's a type of ownership. Could you own a co-op? Yes, that's a type of ownership. Can you own a condo that is a townhouse style? Yes, that's true. Can you own a townhouse? Not really. That's a style. That's not a type of ownership. Can you rent an apartment that is a townhouse style? Yes, right? In an apartment, you might have kitchen below, bedrooms upstairs, whatever. Nobody lives above you. Nobody lives below you. Townhouse style. So hopefully that clarifies and sets off this kind of construction style of a building versus the condo and co-op, which is actually types of ownership of real property. So those are just a couple points I wanted to bring out for chapter 3. Obviously, when you're reading through, you're going to pull up a lot more definitions and maybe look at some legal things that come up. But these are just an oversight, some comparison about these different types of ownership, different types of business ownership, and the idea of an estate and what that means. I hope that clarifies some of those terms for you. Thanks for being here.